The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet tension, the kind that settles into the walls and lingers long after the footsteps fade. Alina lay exhausted in her narrow bed, her newborn daughter sleeping beside her, wrapped in a pale pink blanket. It should have been a moment of peace, a pause in the storm of labor and fear and relief. Instead, the doors swung open with sharp impatience, and her mother-in-law, Valentina Sergeevna, entered like a verdict already decided. Valentina did not look at the baby first. She looked at Alina, eyes cold, mouth pressed into a thin line. She had never approved of the marriage, never hidden her belief that her son deserved better, someone wealthier, quieter, more obedient. The birth of the child had not softened her. If anything, it had hardened her resolve. She stepped closer to the bed and spoke in a low, cutting voice, telling Alina she had overstayed her welcome. The words came fast, rehearsed, cruel. This was not her family, Valentina said. This was not her place. She should pack her things, leave the hospital, and not embarrass them further. Alina stared at her, stunned, her body still aching, her arms trembling as she instinctively pulled the baby closer. Nurses passed by in the hallway, unaware of the storm inside the room. Valentina's voice rose, sharp enough to slice through the quiet. She accused Alina of trapping her son, of being careless, of bringing shame. Then came the final insult, delivered with a bitter smile. She was abandoned now, Valentina said, and running to the wrong station if she thought this child would save her. Tears welled in Alina's eyes, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of this woman. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened, the words refusing to come. Valentina turned toward the door, satisfied, convinced she had won. That was when footsteps echoed behind her, slow and deliberate, followed by a voice calm enough to freeze the room. The unexpected guest had arrived. It was her son's father, Victor, a man Valentina had not expected to see. He had been traveling, unreachable for days, and Valentina had assumed his absence meant approval by default. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with quiet intensity. His gaze moved from Alina's pale face to the baby, then finally settled on Valentina. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortably loud. Victor stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He asked Valentina what she thought she was doing. She tried to explain, to justify herself, but the words fell apart as he listened without interrupting. When she finished, Victor spoke with a firmness that left no room for argument. This was his granddaughter, he said. This was his family. And Alina was under his protection. Valentina opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Victor continued, telling her that if anyone was leaving, it would not be the young mother who had just given birth. He reminded Valentina that cruelty disguised as concern was still cruelty. Then he turned to Alina, his voice softening, and told her she was not alone. Valentina stood frozen, speechless, the authority she relied on suddenly stripped away. Without another word, she turned and left the room, the sharp click of her heels echoing down the corridor like a retreat. The story might have ended there, a private family reckoning in a hospital room, but conflict has a way of repeating itself in different forms, on different stages. Across the ocean, under bright studio lights, another confrontation was unfolding, this one broadcast to millions. Colin Farrell sat on the familiar set of The View, the audience buzzing with anticipation. He had come to promote his latest project, but the conversation quickly veered off course. Joy Behar leaned forward, her tone sharp, pressing him on a political comment he had made months earlier. At first, Farrell responded calmly, choosing his words carefully, trying to steer the discussion back to his work. But the questions kept coming, increasingly pointed, less about understanding and more about provocation. Farrell shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. He spoke about nuance, about context, about the danger of reducing complex issues to soundbites. Joy interrupted him, dismissing his explanation with a wave of her hand and a sarcastic remark that drew laughter from part of the audience. The laughter lingered a second too long. Something changed in Farrell's expression. He straightened, his voice steady but edged with frustration. He said he was happy to have a real conversation, but not to be talked over or caricatured. Joy fired back, insisting she was simply asking questions. The exchange grew tense, the air thick with discomfort. Co-hosts shifted uneasily, sensing the moment slipping out of control. Farrell paused, looked around the table, and then did something unexpected. He stood up. He said he respected differing opinions, but he would not sit there to be disrespected. He thanked the hosts politely, nodded to the audience, and walked off the set. The cameras followed him for a moment before cutting away, the studio buzzing with shocked murmurs. Clips of the moment spread quickly online, dissected and debated. Some praised Farrell for setting boundaries, for refusing to be baited. Others criticized him for overreacting. The talk shows buzzed, social media lit up, and the incident became another chapter in the ongoing conversation about media, power, and respect. In a quiet hospital room, Alina watched the light shift across the wall as afternoon turned to evening. She thought about the confrontation that had nearly broken her and the unexpected support that had saved her. Somewhere far away, a famous actor had walked away from a public clash, choosing dignity over spectacle. The settings were different, the stakes unique, but the core was the same. Sometimes, the most powerful response is not to shout louder, but to stand up, or to stay, or to leave, on your own terms. Sometimes, an unexpected guest arrives, or an unexpected choice is made, and the balance of power shifts in an instant. And in those moments, silence can speak louder than any insult ever could. The night after the birth should have been filled with quiet wonder, the soft rhythm of a newborn's breathing, and the gentle reassurance that the hardest part was over. Instead, tension crept into the maternity ward like a shadow that refused to leave. Alina sat upright in her bed, still weak, her hands clumsily learning the shape and weight of her baby girl. Every movement hurt, but the ache in her chest was sharper than the pain in her body. She sensed trouble before it arrived, the way one senses a storm before the first drop of rain hits the ground. The door opened without a knock. Valentina Sergeevna entered, her posture rigid, her expression carved from disappointment and control. She barely glanced at the child before fixing her eyes on Alina. There was no warmth in her voice when she spoke, no trace of congratulations. Instead, she launched into accusations, each word carefully chosen to wound. She said Alina had ruined everything, that this birth was not a blessing but a mistake that would tie her son down. She questioned the child's future, the marriage itself, and finally Alina's right to be there at all. Alina listened in silence, her fingers tightening around the blanket. She wanted to defend herself, to remind Valentina of the long nights, the promises, the love she believed she shared with her husband. But the words refused to line up. Valentina mistook the silence for weakness and pressed harder. She told Alina to leave the hospital as soon as possible, to disappear quietly and spare the family further shame. With cruel certainty, she declared that Alina was abandoned now, chasing after the wrong train, hoping it would take her somewhere it never would. The baby stirred, sensing the tension, and let out a small cry. That sound finally cracked something in Alina. Tears rolled down her face, not from humiliation alone but from fear. Fear of being alone, of failing her child, of losing the fragile ground she stood on. Valentina watched without sympathy, as if tears confirmed everything she believed. Then the room changed. A knock sounded at the door, firm and unhurried. Before Valentina could react, the door opened and a man stepped inside. It was Victor, her husband's father, a presence long absent but unmistakable. His coat was still dusted with travel, his eyes tired yet alert. He took in the scene in a single glance and understood more than words could explain. Valentina turned, startled. She had not expected him. She began to speak, to justify herself, but Victor raised a hand, stopping her. He walked to the bedside and looked at the baby, his face softening in a way Alina had never seen before. Then he looked at Alina and nodded, a simple gesture that carried more support than any speech. When Victor finally spoke, his voice was calm but unyielding. He told Valentina that her behavior was unacceptable, that no one had the right to humiliate a woman who had just given birth. He said this child was his granddaughter and that Alina was part of the family whether Valentina liked it or not. Every word stripped Valentina of the authority she believed she held. Valentina tried to protest, but her confidence faltered. Victor reminded her that strength did not come from cruelty and that driving people away only led to emptiness. He told her, plainly, that if anyone should leave, it was her. Silence filled the room, thick and final. Valentina stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. At last, she turned and left, the door closing behind her with a soft click that felt like an ending. Alina exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Victor stayed a while longer, speaking gently, reassuring her that she was not alone and never would be. When he left, the room felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had relaxed. Alina looked down at her daughter and whispered a promise she did not yet know how to keep, but intended to try. Far away from that quiet hospital, under the glare of television lights, another kind of confrontation was reaching its breaking point. Colin Farrell sat across from Joy Behar on The View, his expression composed but guarded. What had started as a routine interview quickly shifted into something sharper. Joy pressed him on his opinions, her questions edged with accusation rather than curiosity. Farrell answered thoughtfully at first, trying to explain himself, but his responses were repeatedly interrupted. The studio audience laughed at a cutting remark, and Farrell's patience thinned. He spoke about respect, about the importance of listening rather than talking over someone. Joy dismissed his concerns, framing them as defensiveness. The exchange grew tense, the kind of tension that makes even seasoned hosts uncomfortable. Co-hosts attempted to steer the conversation back, but it was too late. Farrell paused, took a breath, and made a decision. He stood up slowly, his movement deliberate. He said he came to have a conversation, not a confrontation, and that he would not remain in a space where he felt misrepresented. His tone was firm but controlled, more disappointment than anger. Then he thanked the audience and walked off the set. The moment rippled outward almost instantly. Clips spread online, headlines debated whether he was justified or overly sensitive. Supporters praised him for setting boundaries, for choosing self-respect over exposure. Critics accused him of walking away when challenged. The incident became another symbol in the ongoing debate about media culture, power dynamics, and the line between tough questioning and disrespect. Back in the hospital, Alina scrolled through her phone while her baby slept. She stumbled across a clip of Farrell's walkout and watched it twice. Something about it resonated deeply. Two very different worlds, yet the same core struggle. One woman standing her ground in silence until help arrived. One man choosing to leave rather than be diminished. Both moments hinged on dignity. Life rarely offers neat resolutions. Valentina would not change overnight, and the fallout from that confrontation would linger. Farrell's walkout would continue to be argued over, reframed, and forgotten by some, remembered by others. But for Alina, the lesson was clear. Power did not always belong to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it belonged to those who refused to accept humiliation as their fate. As dawn broke, pale light filled the hospital room. Alina held her daughter close and felt something new settle in her chest, fragile but real. Courage. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. The kind that waits, or walks away, or stands still until the world shifts around it.